Today you're going to get one of my favorite plays, Spider 2Y Banana. I'm going to tag it with Z over.
Actually, Coach Gruden, that's only part of this story. This video has been something like 12 years in the making, and I've just never had the balls to really attempt something concise like this. Like, it's kind of spooky. This is something all my buddies know, so it's not coming out of left field, but when I was 17, I spent a month in a psych ward. And yeah, that sounds about as shitty as you'd think, but I figured with the increased discussion around mental health as of late, and some stuff that's happened in the sim community, and just as a way to satisfy people's curiosity, might as well finally come out about it. So it's probably best to start with what kind of person I was before all this happened. This is all important information for doctors to have, and it's essential to get this stuff across to them early without sugarcoating anything, because when they start seriously examining what's wrong with you, this helps them rule out a lot of disorders and prevents you from being on the wrong medication. So if you know me like at all, it's pretty easy to figure out that I was a computer nerd, so just imagine everything that comes with that archetype. My grades hovered in the low 80s in every subject. I had a decent chunk of friends all over the place. I'd never been in like a schoolyard fight of any kind, and I never like ran around the neighborhood causing trouble. Like I don't have stories of egging people's houses or causing shit at the playground or even like shoplifting, just petty shit from 7-Eleven. In hindsight, I was probably a video game addict to an extent, but like my parents were kind of dipping into helicopter territory, and video games were the only form of entertainment I wasn't like limited from. I think it took until my senior year of high school for my parents to get comfortable with me just going out with friends for extended periods of time. But anyway, that's the baseline of what we're working with, just an honor student from a Ukrainian family with no behavioral issues to speak of. So, what caused such an extreme mental health crisis that I was eventually hospitalized for it? This one's pretty easy. So, I played high school football and was extremely average at it. I ran the same 40 time as Tom Brady during his rookie season, so even at my peak physical shape, I'm destined to be an insurance salesman and probably shouldn't be on the field. But I had a pretty accurate arm and knew the playbook, so I was our backup quarterback. For a lot of teams, that's a death sentence and you're relegated to clipboard Jesus, but we absolutely steamrolled teams, and I'd usually play the whole second half even in the playoffs. Because I'm a manlet at 5'8", I got thrown around a lot, but there's one play in particular I can point to where my head really took a beating and probably set this whole thing off. It was the fall of 2008. We're in the playoffs. We call what's essentially Spider 2Y Banana, so you fake it to the running back and then he releases for a check down.
He's going to bluff him right into the flat, 1 to 2 yards deep.
I get the ball off in time and Mike is just gone. What nobody realizes and the camera barely manages to catch is that I actually got really fucked up here. Just the way I got tackled, my body kind of wound up like a coil and my head actually accelerated as it hit the ground. I landed pretty squarely on the back of my head. So the symptoms started pretty slowly. I just couldn't do math to begin with. Any math. Like my math, physics, and chemistry grades dropped almost 40%. I'd never seen marks as low as 8 or 12% on a test before, but I was basically now a special needs student. But only in math. Anything with writing, like English or history, and I was fine. So my grades were just really lopsided for a semester. It was like min-maxing an RPG character. We didn't realize this was a symptom that something was really wrong with me and just attributed it to me not studying hard enough or playing too much Xbox, which was mistake number one. I also couldn't retain information, so studying and taking notes in class just straight up didn't work anymore. I started daydreaming a lot in class, I slept a lot in class. I just remember being really tired and not wanting to be there. Like overnight, I just got bored of school when this was never a problem before. When it comes to the actual breakdown, the timeline gets a bit foggy for me, so I'm going to try and do my best here. I remember over the summer of 2009, right before my senior year, I started getting a little more irritable each day. I don't do coffee or energy drinks, but it was like I was just fucking scatterbrained on a caffeine high and just grumpy all day. And it started the cycle of like waking up grumpy and being really short with people, getting in some like petty argument with my parents or friends over dumb shit, and then I was just even more grumpy and scatterbrained, and it just fed itself day after day, and I could never sleep it off. Class starts in September, and now I can't sit still at all. It was like I developed ADD. I actually still have nightmares about this, but I'd be sitting in like English class and have to reread the same page of a book 3 or 4 times because I was just so distracted. I just had zero attention span. Even getting into the truck to go home for the day, like my mom would ask how school was, and I would just get frustrated at the question. Like it felt like too much effort to explain what I did in class or who I'd had lunch with that day. I just had zero patience at all and was permanently irritated. I also noticed that I had a weird headache, the kind you get from like looking at a computer screen for too long where like the front part of your head has this like burning sensation. I noticed that this was more and more common after school and the only way to fix it was more sleeping. And within like days of the semester starting, this immediately shot to 11 at home. Like I'd get violent with my parents over the dumbest shit, like what we'd have for supper or how my steak was cut. Or I'd start punching holes in walls because a friend said they wanted to hang out and then canceled on me. Sometimes I'd run out of the house and be missing for a few hours while I just walked around the neighborhood. Other times I'd get pinned down and hauled off to the hospital for an evening. It was crazy how things escalated from, oh wow, I can't do math anymore, to part of the house is destroyed and I'm in handcuffs. So this went on for about 3 or 4 months. There would be some sort of meltdown at home. We'd go to our family doctor within 48 hours being like, what the fuck? I'd be hastily put on medication. The meds really wouldn't work as advertised, and there'd be another meltdown at home a short time later. Medication, I found, wasn't scary the way it's depicted on places like Reddit. Some meds would just make me more hyperactive and awake, whereas others made me really tired to the point where I just couldn't play games or focus on schoolwork. They never actually cured like the constant irritability or just like the kind of headaches I was having. I just felt grumpy and foul all the time, so I wasn't actually getting better. I remember just being really scared and having no idea how long this whole thing was going to last either, and I developed a lot of anxiety wondering whether I'd graduate high school or even be able to hold a job. The thoughts that run through your head are really scary at this time. You go from being excited about, I don't know, going to university, finding a job, maybe meeting a girl, and within months it's like, this weird state of chaos might be your life for the next 4 decades, and not only will you fail to hit those milestones, your own safety is going to be at risk on a daily basis. You're kind of given this like crystal ball and can extrapolate exactly how bad it's going to get as the years progress, and it's actually really frightening. I think what saved me is that anytime there was a doctor's appointment or new meds were prescribed or there was a treatment program suggested to me, I just obliged without question and tried to give all the healthcare professionals as much feedback as I could. It really bothers me to hear stories of people who just give up or are like combative against their parents during these kinds of situations because it's pretty much the worst thing you could do. Each day you resist treatment or therapy or whatever, even if you're not necessarily excited about the new medication you're on, that adds maybe 3 months to your potential recovery time. So if you extrapolate that across months or years of being stubborn, it really quickly adds up and there ends up being a tangible point of no return. There is just an unbelievable amount of guilt that still lingers from this period, and I didn't expect it to have such a stranglehold on my life all these years later. In some ways, it fueled some really positive things, like I don't drink at all because of it. I felt that I'd subjected people to so much insanity for that period of 4 months that it would be selfish of me to be drunk around them and make them take care of me all over again. So, like, my liver's fine, and I don't have a single, like, I got drunk and X happened story, which is pretty nice. But because I found it so difficult to put all this behind me, every time I'd get promoted at work or win a race or have a good evening with friends or just have something good happen to me, I would feel like I didn't deserve it and just get hit with memories of like this 4 month period over and over again. It's not fun to live with, and I imagine a lot of people who have gone through the same thing as me have that similar wave of guilt. If you go 3 to 4 months like this and don't show even a sliver of improvement, which I wasn't, that's when inpatient programs are on the menu. In layman's terms, psych wards. So I was admitted to the Royal Alexandra Hospital on I think February 2nd of 2010, and they had a whole ward that was just for kids aged I think 14 or 13 to 17. So it's all teenagers in there. I think people are probably getting a bit excited at what kinds of like wild stories I must have from being in there, but in reality, it's pretty anticlimactic. I've noticed over the years that some kids have gone on YouTube and really slandered their nurses as being cold or hostile or claimed that they were sedated against their will. This is something I personally never experienced and have always felt was just them telling a really warped view of events because they were just really sick at the time and their memory is a bit warped. Psych wards designed for this age group are basically just college dorms you can't leave. I've always thought the movie It's Kind of a Funny Story is like really accurate, so that's a good movie to watch if you want like the full experience of this. You have a roommate, the nurses are all pretty young, and there's really no set agenda beyond the basics. During the days, you're all brought to a classroom where you can work on schoolwork that's been forwarded to the facility from just wherever you went to school. And then in the evenings, you're basically free to entertain yourself however you want or just mingle with the other kids. My schoolwork, for some reason, was never forwarded, which gave me a shitload of free time, and eventually my nurses let me bring in my guitar from home. So there was a week I basically just sat down and learned a huge chunk of Metallica's And Justice for All. That should give you an indication of the volume of free time we had in there. There's definitely a camaraderie you build with the other kids you're in there with, and the staff started taking us out for dinner to the hospital gym when they realized we all generally got along. Like, one of my favorite memories from that whole stay was just playing football catch with my soon to be girlfriend. Or we had this game we all played in the common area inside the actual ward where the goal was to just smoke someone in the face with a foam ball when they weren't looking. I remember after the first week thinking it was all way more fun than it probably should have been. Now, like, there's still a point to all of this. You basically meet with a team of healthcare professionals once every few days, and this is the only excitement you have to look forward to beyond, I don't know, playing Nintendo Wii in the evening. For me, this is when the topic of playing football started being brought up a lot more seriously. This was right around the time the NFL started getting in really hot water for concussions, and it was suggested to just run an EEG test, which is basically a brain activity scan to see if, I don't know, any electrodes are misfiring or whatever. That was pretty much an instant game changer because, yeah, they found something and put me on epilepsy medication of all things. My parents, within like 2 or 3 days, noticed a difference, and chatter quickly turned into, all right, when can this dude come home? And I think that day ended up being February 24th or the 25th. So I was in there close to a month. But that's really why you should always just supply as much info as possible to your doctor. Good medication is life changing, and the change was really that good and that drastic. So the whole recovery portion of this and like how I got through it and some of the lingering after effects I experienced, that really ends up being phase 2 of a mental health crisis. This stuff really doesn't just end full stop once you're discharged from an inpatient program. There's a lot more you have to deal with afterwards. So, what are the steps I immediately took? Because these are actually quite important. The first and probably the most important thing I did is that I stuck with medication and counseling and wasn't stubborn about either of them. I didn't make excuses to like miss appointments or flush meds down the toilet or got angry at my doctors or whatever. I didn't treat any of this as optional and just did whatever was asked of me. The second thing I did is that I worked with my therapist to put together a sort of action plan where I could actually succeed. A lot of kids, if they have some sort of crisis in high school or even university, they instantly get paranoid that they won't graduate or get a job or go to college, and in a lot of cases, this aggravates their anxiety and makes things worse. We instead did the opposite. I dropped all the classes I didn't need for the final semester and just did the essentials online to lighten the workload. I wasn't expected to apply for jobs until I was ready, and university was just completely off the table. I didn't have to be paranoid that I was racing against the clock to get my life together, and it made a huge difference. I ended up graduating on time and had a job by the winter. The third thing we did, everyone knew about this and was kind of informed in one way or another. So, what's kind of common with a mental health crisis is that families will start covering everything up or just deny their kid has a problem because they're embarrassed. And then the kid has to make up these really grandiose lies about where they've disappeared to, or they just get really argumentative all the time. We didn't do any of that. Everyone, including friends and teachers and just random classmates, knew what was going on, and if you had a question, you were totally free to ask. Part of this was helped by the fact that my mom was the afternoon librarian at my high school, so like if kids wanted to know like what was going on with me, they could just ask my mom like on a lunch break. I found the more kids were allowed to ask questions and actually understand what was going on, the less inclined they were to actually mock me for it, and there was little to no bullying over any of this. Those three steps, I think, pretty much anyone could follow, but at the same time, it's not completely smooth sailing during the recovery process. The biggest thing I remember once I was on the mend and getting back to normal was how little I trusted myself. Let's say you get in an argument with your parents, which is still pretty standard at that age, and it's even standard now. I would sit in my room not knowing if I was in the right and had made a valid point, or if I was having another breakdown. If I was at work and something happened that was unfair or retarded, which happens a lot at minimum wage jobs and department stores, I genuinely wouldn't know if I was right to feel that way or if I was just going crazy. Even with video games, let's go into familiar territory here. If I didn't like a game or was being critical of it, I didn't know if I was right on the money and the game actually did suck, or this was a sign something was wrong with me. Because the descent into a mental health crisis was so gradual and basically just started with headaches and feeling frustrated and irritable, anytime I felt this way in the future, I'd get really, really worried and just overthink the shit out of it. The other element of recovery that was not so great, I was dumb and ended up getting involved with a girl I'd met in the hospital who was a year or two younger than me. Now, I know what you're thinking, you're an idiot, and yeah, you're right, But at the time, it made a lot of sense, and this is a pretty common occurrence with inpatient programs. There's a lot of wild shit you experience in the thick of a mental health crisis that you can't really talk about with other people because it'll just freak them out. You might get arrested or destroy a room in the house. Your parents might say some really sadistic shit to you out of anger that kind of lingers for a few days, and you're not sure if they were serious or not. You have to deal with the nervousness that comes with seeing your friends again for the first time. You might see in your folks' browsing history that they've been looking at programs to send you away to. Or you might even have to deal with the fallout of like a really nasty family therapy session that starts a bunch of infighting. It was actually really nice to be able to sit on the phone with this girl or sit on the edge of her bed and just bounce things off each other and be like, what did you do when your parents told you to run away and go live in a shelter? Or, oh God, my friends found out I was in a psych ward. How did you approach that? So, as practical and I guess comforting as this kind of sounds on paper, the problem was that Brittany over the years didn't really get better, and I felt kind of trapped with how to actually handle it. You can't really argue that she's too crazy for you because you were both patients in a psych ward just a few years earlier. You're expected to cut her some slack because she's very obviously got mental issues and is just not recovering at the rate that you are. But at the same time, she's still acting pretty cruel and abusive towards you, and you do have to draw a line at some point. I got exposed to some ugly truths through all this. Sometimes people in the spot just don't get better, and all the stuff PSAs preach about tolerance and understanding, it really only goes so far when they're taking a swing at you in some empty parking lot. And when it comes to recovery, it became really difficult for me to determine when I was back to normal. Right as I was starting to feel a lot better and finally got myself off medication completely, the kind of emotional stuff that comes with an abusive girlfriend would kind of overlap and exhibit a lot of the same symptoms as a mental health episode. So, like, for example, I'd be laying in bed on a Saturday afternoon, not sure if I was depressed and needed to go back on meds for round two, or was just sad that my girlfriend was sending me word salad and accusing me of being a crackhead. But for all intents and purposes, if you asked me to pinpoint an exact day where I felt relatively back to normal, I'd say by early 2011, so a little over a year after this all began. I had a job, I reconnected with all my old friends, was making money, life was pretty good. So a lot of people, after they go through something like this, they really want to hide it. They don't want to talk about it, or they just don't want other people knowing because they think people might use it against them. And like I get that, but I kind of took a step back and tried to look at everything from a 30,000 foot overview. A lot of the individuals in charge of like mental health awareness or the actual programs are kind of detached from everything. I'll put it in simpler terms, but like sometimes the people who develop racing games don't even like racing or cars to begin with. To them, it's just a job and they stay in their lane and just do what's asked. And I kind of realized reading through all the first-hand accounts of people who'd gone through a local system and would like go to our local paper to bitch and complain that these people could actually use some help. So I basically just started sending off emails being like, here's who I am, here's some references. I'm willing to give like feedback or just work on anything if there's any sort of focus group that exists for the kind of adolescent or young adult side of mental health. I'll do it unpaid, I don't even care. And it turns out nothing like this actually existed. It took a while to get off the ground, but we had something running by, I think, 2017. Got a nice fancy volunteer card and everything. I probably can't name the group or share like specifics of what we've done due to NDAs, but I've worked on a lot of documentation that's now distributed in hospitals and doctors' offices in our city and done some public speaking to nurses and staff too. So everyone's been wondering like, what have you been doing since you closed your website? And that's the answer. I've been writing documentation for kids recovering from mental health episodes. It was conveyed to me that one of the handbooks I'd written is basically used every Thursday on schedule at the hospital I was once admitted to, so that was really cool to hear. There's also been a shitload of like smaller info sheets handed out at doctors' offices that are definitely my work, even though they sort of blend in and have the same uniform Alberta Health Services design. One of them I even got a bit of Brittany's help on, which kind of allowed us to both like close that chapter and put everything behind us, so that was really nice. We're obviously not as productive with the lockdowns, but we're still chugging ahead with some projects. You might hear about one within the year, and you'll definitely know it's me behind it. So, I guess that's that. That's what a mental health crisis is like. Spider 2 Y Banana sent my ass to the psych ward, and I was on medication for about a year. Thanks, Mr. John.
We're going to call this strong right slot,
2 right,
Z
Z
right.
right, Spider 2.
Spider 2 Y Banana Z over. And you're going to call it like it's your favorite play you've ever gotten in your life. Like it's, oh man, strong right slot, Z right, Spider 2 Y Banana Z over. It's not going to be. Hey, strong, it's not as you, right? So I can't wait to get the hell out of here. You know what I mean?
Yep.